All right, so I am here to talk to you today about art, and art is something that speaks in an oblique language. And what I mean by that is not all artists and not all artwork speaks in the same language. Sometimes it's instructional, sometimes it is emotionally based. I would say that whatever language it speaks in, oftentimes, it's always going to require some kind of interpretation. And that interpretation is an integral part of what we need to do with art. So I think perhaps more importantly today, what I'd like to speak to you about is the role that art can play in teaching empathy and understanding human difference. So to do that, I am going to speak a little bit about my own practice as an artist, and I would like to sort of take you through that and then talk a little bit about the exhibition that is going to be coming up at the Station Gallery in Whitby. So that's as close to Toronto as it's getting for the next little while. This is an exhibition that's been touring nationally since 2011. Actually, I guess internationally, because it was also in the United States. So it's going to be at the Station Gallery in Whitby from mid-January until the end of March in 2014. I'm also going to talk a little bit about an educational program that I'm really excited about, where 600 young people are going to be brought into the gallery, not all at once, but 600 young people are going to be brought into the gallery in groups to participate in this program. And I'll get to that a little bit later in the talk, but I'm really excited about what's planned there. So around my own experience, though, seeing differently is at the core of my own experience. It's part of my everyday experience, and it has defined the way I communicate as an artist, as a designer, and as an educator. My current work involves the creation of experiences that are intended to heighten the viewer's awareness. And I will actually pause and say, I really struggle with the word viewer, but the word audience doesn't work much better. They're both centered around one sense or the other. Is it observer? I'm not sure. So we'll go with viewer for the moment. All right? And I'd also say that these experiences are intended to give people cause to reevaluate what they see, what they hear, what they remember. And from my own perspective, perhaps most importantly, to question the potential for loss. All right, so I said something about seeing differently here, and I'll describe a little bit about how I see. And I'll go back to some of my earliest memories, very young, learning how to walk young. And those memories really are about the ways in which the world moved. And I'm not talking about rotation. I'm talking about, from my own perspective, the world jittered. It moved erratically. And so my earliest memories are of falling down and staring my world into submission. They're not associated with people. They're not associated with time or events, but they are associated with the peculiarities of place. So my earliest memories are about the vibrations of an intricately patterned wallpaper, or of linoleum and wood floors rushing up to meet me, or of a favorite striped shirt that appeared to move on its own. I really loved that shirt. So my work references a love of reading, and that the ability to read, that is the first thing that I notice slipping as my vision changes. It is often obsessive. It is about a constant desire to gather, to look, and to find those memories that are the things that I want to keep, even if someday the sense of sight disappears. And so this last part also wrapped up in those early memories. And I'll say that it was around the age of 8, actually it was at the age of 8, following the second in a series of surgeries to at least partially correct my vision, I was told by a surgeon to prepare myself for blindness. So, being a very pragmatic kid, that's exactly what I did, all right? And so blindness has shaped and defined much of my life in more ways than I care to admit. I'll have to clarify here. I'm not actually blind. I have low vision, and my eyes move independently from each other, so I don't have stereo vision. There's always two of you. I joked with a friend of mine that's having twins the other day that she's having quadruplets, and she's forbidden me from ever mentioning that again. So, also, the independent movement of my eyes means that as I read, what happens is that the words tend to move from line to line. They move around the page. Oftentimes, as fatigue sets in, the entire words will flip back and forth, and the entire page will sort of invert itself erratically as I move from left eye to right and back. So, in a way, and I've often gotten the question, I teach design, and I made a career as a graphic designer, as a specialist in information design. And I often got the question, well, how does someone who can't see do these visual things? And it really is that the pursuit of visual art was how I was coming to understand the world that I lived in. And it was so that drawing and painting, for example, was how I was understanding people's mannerisms so that I could recognize them even though I couldn't see who they were. I often don't recognize people's faces. They'll have to speak to me first, or I recognize a gesture. And people I've known for a long time know to make odd gestures as they're walking down the hallway. So as I moved away from more literal representations of people and places and things in the artwork that I was making, I started to explore work that was far more situational. And again, I had another seminal moment at some point on a very cold winter night. It was about minus 40 degrees, and I was walking from the school to my home in Windsor. And the salt and the snow and the ice it was too cold for the salt to even melt the ice on the roads. So my glasses were broken, the lens had fallen out, and I was walking around for all intents and purposes, blind, but looking at these things that were absolutely fascinating. So I continued wandering around in the cold, photographing these evocative forms that were nothing more than stains on the road. They became an improper reconstruction of that moment on a winter night. So from there, I moved toward to really expanding the kind of situation where the audience members were invited to participate in the work in some way, where their physical positions became very important. So this particular piece is actually a transmitted video, and it was called The Blindfolded Sentry. This piece kind of invited people to come up and look through this complex series of magnifiers at a transmitted video that was on a tiny little 3-inch screen about the size of an outstretched hand. And yet, because it was transmitted, as people moved up to look at this image or look at this sculpture, they became a barrier to the signal, and they would have to do this little dance back and forth, becoming very aware of a particular distance that the work itself insisted upon. And I also, at that time, started to, I hesitate to use the word monumentality, but I started really to expand the scale of the work. And this is a piece that was about 15 feet wide and about 35 feet long, and it was challenging in terms of the audience because they had to walk around it, walk on it, walk through it to gather all of the details, which happen to be images that have been etched into steel that can be read both by the senses of vision and by touch. But it really was this fragmentary experience where you're asked to walk on the artwork, and you're going to be hesitant about that. And as you're walking on it, those concrete tiles tipped a little tiny bit. So you're also cautious of every single step you make. As I move toward the body of work that I think of as sort of more preservation, where the previous work was about preparation for blindness, I'll say it became more and more obsessive. Books kind of presented themselves to me as the raw material of the sculpture that I was making. And as books actually started to lose their meaning for me, I started to hang on to them very tightly. I rolled them up and I bound them shut, and I buried them in salt in glass cases that couldn't be opened. I embossed poetry in braille across the printed pages, and I buried them in cement. And then I moved on to work that really was about this, I guess, a tangible exploration of how I see, how I read, that idea of work, or of words that move from line to line and all over the page, and having to gather them to piece them together in some sort of ongoing story. So chasing words became this tangible and physical aspect of cutting from paper, of rolling it up with ink, of layering these things to kind of represent, even for myself, what that movement is that I have so much difficulty actually conveying to others. So I also then started to represent things that fade in the light. I cut pages into and stitched them together into books that are overly protected in mahogany and aluminum and tempered glass cases. They are effectively removed both from the realm of vision and from the sense of touch. These pages, you can see, if you can see, have text that is cut on the top surface, but because you can see through to the layers below, you can see that there's text there, but its meaning is held completely at bay. I started cutting cross-sections of books to reveal something about their content. Who knows what it is? It's almost a process of editing. And then I bound them together and etched new text into their surface, text that can be read by the sense of touch. And it was about quietly erasing their former lives. So the work that's been traveling around and that will be at the Station Gallery in Whitby has dozens and dozens and dozens of books that have been cut and bound together between steel compression plates under hundreds of pounds of pressure. That front surface is polished, glass smooth, and then new text has been etched into the surface. There's a rail system that travels around the gallery, and it carries a magnifier that the audience members can move back and forth to be able to read things. Now, there is a tendency to think of it as a kind of a linear story, that you should start at one end and move it to the other. But what people quickly find is that you get to the end of something and it just stops, and something else has started in its place, and you have to back up and try and find where the beginning of that phrase is. In Medicine Hat, when I had the show at the Esplanade Gallery about a year ago, on the opening day, there was a young guy named Brandon that came in while I was photographing the show. And it was really great because he was looking at the work and very careful. And I told him that he could ask me some questions if he was wondering about anything. I was just there taking some photographs. And he said, well, I really love this. I love these objects, but I don't get it, and I'm very frustrated by it. So I said, well, maybe you can describe what your frustration is. And he said that I took this magnifier to the one end, and I started reading, and I could read a little bit, and then it just stopped. And so I moved to the next one, and the same thing happened. And I figured I missed something, so I went back, and I started reading something else, and it just stopped. And I'm moving this all the way down here, and it just stops. So I don't know what it is that you want me to understand from it. And I said, it was so tough, but I said, if I had a gold star, I would give it to you right now, because that is very much the experience that I'm trying to in many ways recreate, is that there really isn't a way with this work to read it in a linear way. It is a matter of going along and searching and gathering and trying to find those details and of piecing a story back together that is, in many ways, a very poetic sense of time and place. So at the Station Gallery, what we're also going to be doing is putting together an educational program with, as I've mentioned, 600 kids that will be coming through. And our goal is to really help them use this work and to use a dramatic performance that has been commissioned by a local playwright to help them understand the differences that we all encounter. We all have different experiences. And so the experience of disability in this instance is going to be learned through examination of the work. They're going to be making things in the gallery, and the focus is not on making pretty pictures. They're not going to be taught a technique. What's really great is that they will be engaged with the importance of reading, the meaning of the work. They will be talking about valuing the things they have while they still have them. And these are young kids, and this is some pretty challenging subject matter. So what's also going to happen is, in this idea of putting together a dramatic performance, they'll be working in partners where they'll have to rely pretty heavily on each other for direction, to understand how they need to move around a space. And they'll have some time to rehearse their section, and then as they come to the end of that particular session, what they're going to be doing is putting together the performance as kind of a day in the life of someone with visual impairment. Now, it's not going to be me in the play. It is really about looking outward so that they can reflect upon their own experiences, the people that they know, the people they have encountered themselves. So I'll finish up here by saying that art really does have an important role in terms of teaching empathy, of getting us to consider differences in experience, and immersing ourselves in cultural experiences is a very, very important thing to do. We need to move beyond being observers. We need to take that leap into immersive experience to understand each other. And it is also about learning to speak and to share in the oblique language of art. And that this is about understanding and appreciating our own differences. Thank you.